1920 by 1080 is kind of the standard wide format you see on YouTube. 1820 by 1080. So many numbers. Welcome to the Creative Control Room Podcast, episode number 115. I'm your operator, Ryan Hafey. This is my Creative Control Room, and this is a podcast for podcasters. In this week's show, I've got a bit of a rebuttal to last week's Doomsday predictions for the podcast industry, and I will also be answering some questions that I have received on some of my video content over on TikTok on the subject of podcasting. And yes, if you didn't know, I am on TikTok. At Ryan Hafey is where you can find me. If you're not already on TikTok, don't worry about it. I urge you not to sign up for TikTok. You'll spend way too much of your time over there. But if you're on TikTok and you would like to come hang out and see what I'm posting over there, it'd be great to have you over there. I've been getting a few questions over on TikTok on some of my podcast related content, and I thought it would be fun to address some of that here today. By the way, if there is any particular content that because I'm interested in kind of expanding my content mix over there. If there's anything in particular you would like to see from me over on TikTok within the realm of podcasting, I would love some suggestions. It could be, reaction content to other people's podcasts. It could be some just general podcasting tips, stuff about podcast gear, whatever it might be. Let me know and shoot me a comment, and I will start doing more over there. Because right now, really, the primary content you will see on my TikTok page is clips from the episodes, which it gets a little redundant over time, especially if you're already watching me here. You don't need to see that again over there. Some people like the clips, helps drive a little bit of traffic to the podcast. Ultimately, though, it's just redundant, and I want to kind of mix it up a little bit. Also, I've been thinking about the format of this show going forward, and kind of as I was putting together my notes for the show, singing through that Q&A style. From a sustainability standpoint, I think a Q&A style format is really going to work well for the show in the long run, and I think that's ultimately where I want to get with this show. I think it gives the audience an opportunity to kind of steer the content of where I'm going to go, and then I can do my best to provide answers to your questions and help solve any problems that you have in the realm of podcasting. I would love to be kind of that destination for people who just have general questions when it comes to podcasting. And of course, if I see things out there, whether it's news or new gear, whatever it happens to be that's interesting in the world of podcasting, I will share that as well. But I think for my sanity and just kind of given the workload that I have with this podcast and things outside of this podcast, a Q&A format would be great. So if anyone out there is watching, I would love for you to ask me any questions that you have in the comments, and then I'll pick some questions and we will start using those and answering those questions in future episodes. But for now, let's get into a little bit of podcast news. So last week's episode was all about the demise of podcasting in 2023. There have been a lot of reports and articles out lately that basically say that podcasting is in for a rough 2023 and beyond. Right now, one of the reports that is going around is that there was an 80% drop in new podcasts launched between 2020 and 2022. So in 2020, there were over 1 million new podcasts launched. In 2022, there's only 219,000 or so. If you go search 80% drop in new podcasts in Google, you'll see reports from PC Mag, Neiman Lab, The Verge, and some others. And on the surface, that headline looks pretty daunting. But there was, I was reading an article from Pod News, which gives a little bit of a different perspective on that. And I wanted to talk about it a little bit as, again, kind of a rebuttal to last week's negativity towards the podcasting industry, and hopefully give a little hope to anyone that's a little concerned about what's happening in podcasting at the moment. So how I understood the article comes down to this. It really, it has a lot to do with Anchor.fm. Anchor.fm is an audio podcast hosting platform. It's a free platform. It's what this podcast, the audio version, is hosted on. It's owned by Spotify. But apparently on Anchor FM, only 4.6 of Anchor hosted shows have more than 10 episodes. and that had been updated in the past 30 days. So in other words, there's a lot of content on Anchor that is just dead content. A lot of dead shows with no episodes, but a lot of shows sitting there with nothing to listen to, right? So what happened, I guess, in 2021? Remember, the big drop came between 2020 and 2022. So what happened in 2021, apparently, is that Anchor stopped auto-submitting new podcasts to Apple Podcasts, right? So when that happened, all of these kind of podcasts that popped up that nobody really did anything with started being reported to Apple Podcasts, and therefore, basically, because they were no longer being auto-submitted, it skewed the numbers artificially lower and made it seem like there was this massive drop in all these podcasts being created. In fact, Listen Notes, which is the name of the publication or website or whatever you want to call it, they reported that the number of new shows has declined, but actually the number of new episodes remains relatively unchanged. So I wanted to show you this. So this webpage here has some of their data that they reported on. Now, if you look at this chart, this kind of reflects what the headlines have been reporting, which is there's a massive drop. You have this, in 2020, you had just over 1 million new shows. 2022, you only had 221,000. What happened there? Well, if you look down here at this graph here, new episodes by year. So this is new shows. This is new episodes. And if you look, yes, there is a drop off, but there's not nearly the drop off that you see right here. So in conclusion, seems like Pod News could possibly be onto something with this. And what it means to me is, yes, there's not as many new shows out there, but listenership and the people who are actually actively creating podcasts haven't really slowed down much. I think it makes sense to see a little bit of a drop in new episodes, just given kind of the pandemic, sort of slowing down and people getting back to normal lives prior to the pandemic and probably focusing less on making new podcasts. But to say that, podcasting has taken a massive hit and that no one's creating new podcasts anymore really isn't the full story. And I think Pod News did a good job at diving into this one to kind of dig a little bit deeper and tell a different side of the story. So hopefully that gives you a little bit more hope of where we're at with podcasting. I said it last week. I don't think it's going anywhere. And if you want to jump into the podcasting game, I think that you should. All right, let's answer some questions from TikTok. So as I mentioned, I post a decent amount of podcasting related content over on TikTok, a lot of clips from this show, as well as some other just kind of random podcast tips and things like that as they cross my mind. And naturally, people who watch those videos will chime in occasionally with some questions. And I thought I would pick a few of them and answer them here today. So first question is, what camera do I use to record my podcast? So the camera that I have before me here that I am currently looking into is the Sony a6500. This would not be my first choice as far as like cameras that I own. This wouldn't typically be my first choice of camera to use for the podcast, only because it's a little bit older, little bit noisier as far as the footage is concerned. If basically I have a Sony a7 III and Sony a7 IV back here, but the thing is that these two cameras are kind of like, these are my workhorses. These are the ones that I take with me whenever I go on work trips or if I'm doing any kind of paid work or anything like that. And my Sony a6500 right now is all hooked up. It's got a teleprompter connected to it. It's running cables out to an external recorder. To switch a camera out, replace the a6500 with one of these would take a while. So really, I use the a6500 because it looks good enough and it's more of a convenience thing. I don't use the a6500 really for anything else. In fact, all the cameras that I have in here are pretty much stationary in this room, and I rarely, if ever, take them down to use them for something else. But long story short, I use the Sony a6500 and I record it two places actually, into an external recorder, which is above the camera, as well as into OBS, which is on my computer. I export an outbound 4K feed, so it looks nice and sharp. But ultimately, yeah, if you're looking for a budget option for a podcasting camera, the A6500 works pretty well. I also have this angle here is the Sony ZV-1. Talked a lot about this one. This is a great kind of all-around camera if you're looking for one camera that you can kind of take with you for vlogging or to do the podcast. It has an outbound video feed and has decent quality. I like this camera. I also have this camera back here, which is the Sony RX100 Mark V. I've had it for a number of years now. This one's a little bit older. I wouldn't recommend buying this one. This was actually like $1,000 when I bought it, which was quite a bit of money. It's got a Zeiss lens, cool little, very compact camera, still holds up today. I probably wouldn't buy it though. The ZV-1 here is actually cheaper. So if you're going to get a compact camera for podcasting, get the ZV-1. I just happen to have this. Don't use it a whole lot for anything else really anymore. So it fits very nicely here in my studio. By the way, when I'm exporting my feed from the A6500 into my computer, I'm using a log style picture profile on the A6500, and then I'm applying a LUT within OBS after the fact. So, and you don't have to do it that way. I just like to have a little bit more control over the look and the colors and the and the exposure of my footage. Sony cameras, at least some of the older ones, the reds tend to be a little bit off, so you kind of have to adjust those a little bit. You kind of got to play with the skin tones a little bit sometimes. So I export in a version, kind of a custom version of log, run it into OBS, and within OBS, I apply a LUT, and that's what gets baked into the final recording within OBS. If you want to hear more about that, leave me a comment. I can kind of expand on that a little bit more. Anyway, moving on. Another question I got is, how do you record longer than 30 minutes? Someone was curious because a lot of DSLR and mirrorless cameras don't allow you to record for longer than 30 minutes. So they were wondering about some ways to do that. So, and I mentioned this in a TikTok too, but interestingly, and I don't know all the particulars about it, but basically the reason that mirrorless and DSLR cameras are limited to 30-minute recording times comes down to like tariffs and taxes and how camcorders and how cameras are classified. So camcorders can technically record for as long as you need them to. But if you classify a camera as a camcorder, for whatever reason, it comes with an additional tax. And like the limit, the recording limit, I guess that determines it is 30 minutes. So anything under 30 minutes doesn't have to adhere to this classification. Again, this is all just kind of from memory from what I understand about it. But basically, camera makers that make DSLRs and mirrorless limit recording lengths to 30 minutes in a lot of cases in order to avoid paying additional taxes. There's a fun fact for you for the day. If I'm missing anything on that, let me know. But back to the question, how do you record for longer than 30 minutes? There's a couple things you can do. I've kind of already touched on some of them, but number one, you could get like a camcorder of some kind. I mean, you're not going to have as many options as far as like manual controls on camcorders in a lot of cases, but you can use a camcorder and record as long as you need to, which is great. Or you can do what I typically do, which is, as I mentioned, record either into an external recorder and or OBS on a computer. So if you have a camera that can export a clean HDMI feed, so it's called a clean HDMI out, that's what you want to look for. You can run it into an external recorder like an Atomos Ninja 5 or any other external recorder that works with your camera, and or you can run that feed out of the camera into a capture card or something like an A10 Mini, which I have here, and into your computer and use something like OBS, which is AKA Open Broadcaster software, and you record your outbound camera feed onto your PC. There's a couple pros and cons to that. The pros is obviously convenience. It's recording right into your computer. There's no file transfers that you have to worry about after the fact. Cons being, especially if you're running through a capture card, there's going to be a little bit of compression. Even though I'm sending out a 4K feed from the A6500, it gets downsized to 1080p and an A10 mini, and then into the computer. There's some additional compression that goes on there. So you're not getting the full quality, which is why, if you're able to, I would recommend recording into an external recorder. But if you're someone who likes to do a lot of live streaming, OBS is where it's at. It's definitely the best thing to have. And you can tweak the settings to improve your quality. You're also limited a little bit to kind of the speed of your computer that you're using, as far as what recording quality you can have. But those are a couple different options for you. If you are going to be really doing any one of those options, whether it's an external recorder or OBS, you also want to have a camera that you can set it to where it can stay on for extended periods of time. So for example, some cameras will allow you to plug in like a micro USB or USB cable, and then plug it into a USB power outlet. On the A6500, I bought just a dummy battery that basically replaces the regular battery, and then you just plug it into an outlet so that it'll stay on at all times, never turns off. And by the way, when you do it this way, you don't have to hit record on the camera. In fact, that's the whole point. You just turn the camera on, and then the outbound feed gets routed to wherever you want it to go, and the camera just stays on. So then you can record in those other places and not within the camera. I hope that makes sense. Okay, so and then someone was basically asking for clarification on that in a video that I posted on TikTok. They're wondering how to record a camera feed. They said, so basically you're not recording with the camera, you're simply recording what the camera sees, which is, yes, technically true. So again, to kind of reiterate what I mentioned, you want to have a camera that offers a clean HDMI output, and that outbound feed, and what a clean HDMI output is it's just a clean feed without any of the overlays. So if you've ever used a DSLR or mirrorless camera, you've probably looked at the back LCD screen and you see little text and things like that on the screen to tell you what your frame rates are and shutter speed and all that kind of stuff. If you have a clean HDMI feed, it has none of that. It just has what is being captured by the camera. So essentially, you are routing that feed out of the camera into some kind of external recorder, whether it be an Atomos Ninja or OBS on your computer, but that's what you're doing. And then again, kind of related to that, someone asked, why would you record on a mirrorless or DSLR as opposed to, say, something like a camcorder? And really the best answer to that I can think of really comes down to quality. Camcorders do not offer a lot of the flexibility that you have with a DSLR. You lose a little bit of some of the manual controls. The lens is a little bit limited, at least with like the A6500, you can swap out the lenses. You can set all of your exposure controls. You have more control over the look and feel of the footage, different picture profiles to choose from, those types of things. If you're not as well versed in using DSLRs and mirrorless cameras and working with those manual features, and if you're not quite as concerned about the quality of your video, a camcorder would work just fine for you. If you would much rather have something that you can pull out of your pocket, press record, and be off on your way, then that could work for you. But if you want to have that flexibility to be able to really dial in the quality of your video, that is why you would want to choose a mirrorless or DSLR. In a lot of cases too, it comes down to budget. Mirrorless and DSLR cameras are typically more expensive because you got to buy the bodies and the lenses separately. So things to consider, but that's why at least I use a mirrorless or DSLR and not something like a camcorder. Another question, moving on to a different subject. Someone was asking what the best way is to capture vertical video for podcasting. How do they capture vertical video from the podcast for use on like Instagram Reels, TikTok, YouTube Shorts, things like that? There's a few different ways you can do this. If you plan to be cutting a lot of clips from your podcast for use on specifically those platforms where vertical video is prioritized, you obviously want to think about framing when you're recording your podcast in the first place. Like when I cut clips, I'm able to kind of cut myself out of this frame here, and it seems to work. If you're super close to the camera and then you try to crop that out, you're just going to have a big face right in the center of it. And you're not going to have a whole lot of flexibility to maybe zoom in or zoom out. So you want to think first about how you're framed when you're recording the show. For the best quality, you would want to try to record in a higher resolution. So when you post to Instagram Reels, TikTok, YouTube Shorts, the resolution of those videos is typically 1080 by 1920. So 1920 by 1080 is kind of the standard wide format you see on YouTube. 1820 by 1080. So many numbers. 1080 by 1920 is kind of the vertical standard, at least for now. If you're shooting in 4K, which is 3840 by 2160, then your vertical is already longer than 20. Okay. This is so, okay. 1080 by 1920. It's 1,920 pixels tall. If you shoot in 4K, even wide, you have 3840 by 2160. So even at 100%, if you're using 4K footage, a widescreen 4K footage, and you're putting that in a vertical 1080 by 1920 timeline, you're still getting 100% quality and resolution. In other words, if you were to take a clip that you filmed at 1920 by 1080 and then tried to turn that on its side and then put that in a 1080 by 1920 frame, well, now you have all this space and you have to zoom in that footage to 150%, whatever the ratio is, but you have to zoom it in order for it to completely fill the frame. And as you do that, you lose a little bit of quality. Now, recording in 4K is kind of optimal, 4K or greater. That's obviously optimal if you want to maintain that sharpness and that video quality. However, there's been plenty of videos that I did initially before I started recording into an Atomos Mini, when I only used to record at 1920 by 1080 in OBS. There were clips that I posted to TikTok and Instagram Reels that I edited together using the 1080p footage, and it looks fine. Like, there's really nothing wrong with it. You can zoom it in, and most people flipping through their phone aren't going to pixel peep that much. They're not going to notice. They're not going to care that you zoomed in a little bit on some lower resolution footage. But again, that's when framing is important, because you want to make sure that you're framing in a way to where even if you are using 1080p footage, you can place that footage into a tall video frame and be able to zoom it in and frame it up to where everything still fits in the frame the way that you wanted. And then the other thing you could do is just use a second camera. Put a little mount on the camera that you currently have, and maybe a little arm. It could just even be your phone. You could find a way to mount your phone right next to your camera, maybe right next to the camera lens. And on your phone, you're filming vertically, and on your main camera, you're filming horizontally. Whatever works for you, it's another option. It might not work for you if you're someone who talks into the camera like I do, because then you wouldn't be talking into the vertical camera. I don't know. Just think about your situation, whatever works for you. But those are a few options if you want to capture vertical video to use on those platforms. Last question. How do you add timestamps and chapters to YouTube videos? So I did an episode a few weeks back now. It was actually a 3-part series breaking down a guide that YouTube put together about how to optimize podcasting on YouTube. Go check out those episodes if you haven't. But there was a section where I talked about timestamps, or as YouTube calls them, chapters. And I guess I didn't break it down simply enough as far as how to add timestamps. So I had a couple of people asking questions. So if you've ever been watching a video and you look at the little playhead at the bottom of the video, there's some dash line and you see dash lines. Those are the different chapters. And basically it's just a way for people, if you go to watch a video and you want to kind of skip through to a certain part of the video that talks about a certain subject, chapters allow you the ability to easily do that. You can just click right where you want to go, and then boom, you're on that part of the video. So it's handy, but it's also, I think YouTube looks at it favorably. I think it also gives it would have to give a little bit of search engine juice because you're putting extra keywords in your description, things like that. So timestamps come in quite handy, and YouTube themselves recommends them. But how do you add them to a video? It's super simple. All you have to do is type them into your video description. The one thing you have to remember to do, however, is you have to start at 0. So what you would do is go into your video description, type 00:00, type in show intro or whatever subject happens to be the first of your show. And then you hit enter. On the next line, find the timestamp of when the next subject begins. Let's say it's 2 minutes, 11 seconds. You would then type 02:11 and then give that a short description. Enter, continue until you get to the last one, whatever it might be. And that's it. But the only way to activate it to start working is if you start at 0. Also, I believe you have to have, it was either 2 or 3 timestamps minimum for it to work. And each of them has to be at least 10 seconds in length. If any of that is wrong, I'll put a little clarification right here, but I believe those are the requirements in order for timestamps to work. But it's very simple. Just find where the different topics are within your videos, type them in the description, and then they will show up automatically in your video when it is published. And that'll do it for this episode. Once again, if you have questions that you want me to answer on the show, I would love to hear from you. Do me a favor, leave a question in the comments below. And if you're still here with me and you got any value out of this episode, please consider liking and subscribing wherever you happen to be watching or listening, and follow me on social media at Ryan Hafey on Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok. Check out the description for relevant links and gear recommendations, and we will see you in the next one. Bye-bye.